On a rainy evening in Chicago, a struggling father named Marcus Johnson navigates the wet streets with his young daughter, Lily. With no home, no steady job, and only a meager income from washing dishes, Marcus feels the weight of desperation. When they encounter a woman stranded with a luxury vehicle, Marcus offers to help, risking the small amount of money that keeps him afloat. Unbeknownst to him, the woman is the CEO of a major automotive company, and his act of kindness is about to change his life. The rain pounded against the cracked sidewalks, turning the streets of Chicago into a maze of shimmering puddles. Marcus tightened his threadbare jacket, pulling Lily closer as she splashed beside him in her little yellow rain boots. The cold wind cut through his clothes, but he barely noticed. His mind was preoccupied with the day's struggles, his last paycheck gone, an eviction notice, and no plan for the future. All he had was a bag on his shoulder and Lily's small hand in his. "Daddy, look." Lily's voice broke through his thoughts. She pointed across the street to a sleek black BMW parked awkwardly, its hazard lights blinking in the darkness. A woman stood beside it, wrestling with a flimsy umbrella while barking into her phone. Her posture radiated frustration and helplessness. Marcus hesitated. He needed to get to the diner for his dishwashing shift, a job that barely kept him afloat. But Lily tugged his sleeve. "She looks sad," she said softly, her big blue eyes pleading. "Maybe we can help?" Marcus sighed, his breath visible in the cold air. He was exhausted, tired of fighting, tired of struggling, tired of doing the right thing when the world seemed indifferent. But he couldn't say no to Lily, not when she still believed in kindness, as if it were a natural law. "All right, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile. "Let's go see." They crossed the street, the rain soaking their shoulders. As they approached, the woman turned to face them. Her sharp features were partially hidden by damp strands of auburn hair. She wore a tailored gray coat, but it offered little protection from the storm. Marcus raised a hand. "Flat tire?" The woman eyed him quickly, and he knew the moment she made her judgment. Her grip on her phone tightened, her gaze flicking between him and Lily, a black man in worn clothes, approaching her at night. Suspicion flashed across her face before she masked it with forced politeness. "Yes," she said, shifting uncomfortably. "I called roadside assistance, but they're taking forever, and I have a meeting." "I can change it," Marcus interrupted, uninterested in her explanations. He'd seen that look before, felt that hesitation. She didn't trust him, but she didn't have another option. The woman blinked, caught off guard. "Are you sure? It's pouring." "And," she glanced at Lily, "your daughter—" "She'll be fine," Marcus said evenly, rolling up his sleeves. "I've done this 100 times. Lily beamed, stepping forward to hold the umbrella over her father as he crouched beside the car. "My daddy's really good at fixing things," she said cheerfully to the woman. "He says kindness is free, so we should share it with everyone." The woman let out a small, reluctant chuckle, but Marcus didn't look up. He worked quickly, his movements instinctive despite the rain numbing his fingers. Within 15 minutes, the new tire was in place. "That was fast," the woman said, exhaling in relief. She pulled out her wallet and held out a crisp $100 bill. "Here." Marcus shook his head. "No need. Just happy to help." The woman hesitated, her gaze lingering on his tattered shoes and damp sleeves. "At least let me give you a ride," she said. "You're soaked." Marcus hesitated. "We're headed to—" "Wherever it is, I'll take you," she insisted, her tone firm. It wasn't a request. It was a decision. Marcus clenched his jaw, debating whether to refuse. But Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with excitement at the idea of a warm car. "All right," he muttered. "Thanks." As they climbed into the BMW, the woman introduced herself. Victoria Langston. Marcus froze. The name was familiar. He'd seen it on billboards, in business magazines, in the news. CEO of Langston Motors, one of the largest automotive companies in the country. But he didn't make a fuss. She was just another person passing through his life. Lily, however, chatted happily during the ride, talking about how she and her dad always helped people and how kindness was important. Victoria listened with an odd expression, half amused, half something else. When they reached a rundown diner, Victoria pulled out a small notepad. "Give me your number," she said, "in case I have another flat tire." Marcus hesitated, but eventually scribbled it down on a scrap of paper. He had no illusions she wouldn't call. People like her never did. As he stepped back into the rain, he glanced back just in time to see Victoria watching him through the windshield, her expression unreadable. Then she drove away, leaving him standing in the storm, the weight of the night settling on his shoulders once again. The next 2 weeks passed in a slow, grinding blur. The rain never seemed to stop, and neither did Marcus's struggles. The eviction had come swiftly, and the diner job had fallen through. He and Lily spent nights in shelters when space was available, in their car when it wasn't. His phone, though cracked, still worked. But no one called, least of all Victoria Langston. One night, as the cold settled deep into his bones, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He stared at it for a moment before answering. Marcus Johnson. The voice on the other end was smooth and professional. "This is Victoria Langston. Do you have a moment?" Marcus's breath caught. "Yeah, sure. I've been thinking about that night," she said, as if discussing the weather. "And about you." Marcus frowned. "All right. I ran your name," she continued. "Looked into your work history." A slow wave of unease crept up his spine. "Didn't realize I was being investigated." There was a brief pause, then a dry chuckle. "You fixed my car in the pouring rain, and didn't take my money. Forgive me for being curious." Marcus exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. He didn't have time for this. "Look, Ms. Langston, if this is about charity." "It's not," she cut in, her voice sharp and decisive. "My company is expanding. We're opening a new manufacturing facility. And frankly, we need people who actually know what they're doing. I saw your records, your past work at Thompson Auto. You were one of their best mechanics before the company shut down. That's not something I ignore." Marcus went still. "I need a lead mechanic for our maintenance team," she continued. "Someone I can trust to handle things without needing their hand held. If you're interested, we can talk details." His heart pounded against his ribs. He almost laughed at the absurdity of it. A job, a real job, not a side gig, not a patchwork of hustles that barely kept him afloat. A stable, paying job. But then doubt crept in, wrapping around his thoughts like barbed wire. People like her didn't just offer opportunities like this. There was always a catch. "Why me?" His voice was quieter now but firm. "You could hire anyone. Someone with more connections." "More," he hesitated, then exhaled, the bitterness slipping through before he could stop it. "Someone who fits in better with your kind of people." Another pause. When Victoria spoke again, her tone had shifted. "You think I'm handing you this because I feel sorry for you?" "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that people like you don't usually notice people like me unless it benefits them." A silence stretched between them, thick and charged. And then, to his surprise, she let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're not wrong." That admission caught him off guard. "But you should know something, Johnson," she went on, her voice steady. "I grew up in a house that barely had heat in the winter. I know what it's like to watch your parents break their backs just to keep the lights on. And I know how fast people like me forget where they came from once they have enough money to pretend they were never there." Marcus clenched his jaw, unsure how to respond. "This isn't charity," she said again, more forcefully this time. "I don't hire people because I feel bad for them. I hire them because they're good. You're good, and I need good people." He sat there, the weight of her words settling into his chest. He wanted to say yes. God, he wanted to. But the part of him that had been beaten down by years of disappointment, of being overlooked, of being second-guessed, whispered warnings in the back of his mind. "What's the catch?" he asked finally. "You prove yourself first," she said without hesitation. 30-day probation. You work, you get paid. You do the job right. The position is yours permanently. You screw around, I find someone else. A test. It made sense. It was fair, even, and yet part of him still bristled at the idea of having to prove himself to someone who had likely never had to prove herself a day in her life. But then he thought of Lily, curled up in the back seat of their car last night, her tiny body shivering despite the blankets he'd wrapped around her. He thought of the way her voice had wavered when she asked if things would get better. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, he took a breath and answered, "When do I start?" Marcus stood outside the Langston Motors facility, gripping the strap of his duffel bag as the morning sun glared off the massive glass windows of the main office. The building loomed over him, a sleek, modern structure of steel and tinted glass, a stark contrast to the rundown garages and auto shops he was used to. His stomach twisted with a familiar knot of unease. It wasn't just nerves. It was a feeling of stepping into a world that wasn't built for him. A world where men like him were only ever seen in coveralls, with their heads down, fixing things in the background. Lily clung to his side, her small fingers curling around his wrist as she gazed up at the building with wide eyes. "Is this where you're going to work, Daddy?" she asked, her voice laced with excitement and something else. Hope. "Yeah, sweetheart," Marcus murmured, forcing a smile he didn't quite feel. "This is it." He led her toward the entrance, where a receptionist greeted him with a polite but stiff expression, her eyes flicking over his faded jeans and scuffed boots before settling on Lily. "You must be Mr. Johnson," she said, her tone clipped. "Ms. Langston is expecting you." Marcus nodded, keeping his face neutral as the woman picked up the phone and murmured something too quiet for him to hear. A moment later, Victoria appeared at the end of the hall, her sharp heels clicking against the pristine tile floor. She was dressed in a crisp gray blazer and slacks, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. She moved with purpose, her gaze scanning Marcus as she approached, assessing him in that way she always seemed to. "You're on time," she noted, as if mildly surprised. "Figured that'd be a good start," Marcus said dryly. Her lips quirked, but she didn't smile. Instead, she looked down at Lily, who clung to Marcus's leg but stared back at Victoria with unfiltered curiosity. "I thought we agreed he'd start today," the receptionist interjected, a hard edge creeping into her voice. "Is she going to be staying here?" Marcus stiffened. He recognized that tone, the barely concealed irritation, the unspoken assumption that his daughter was a problem, that she didn't belong. He opened his mouth to respond, but Victoria beat him to it. "She'll be fine," Victoria said, her voice cutting through the air with quiet authority. She turned to Marcus. "We have an employee daycare down the hall. You can leave her there while you're working." Marcus hesitated, glancing down at Lily. "You okay with that, baby girl?" Lily looked up at him, then back at Victoria, then finally nodded. "Yeah, I can make new friends." Victoria gave a slight nod, then gestured for Marcus to follow her. He walked beside her through the facility, past towering machinery and gleaming assembly lines. The smell of oil and metal filled the air, familiar and grounding. "Let's get one thing straight," Victoria said as they moved past a group of workers, all clad in identical Navy uniforms. "I didn't hire you because I like you. I hired you because you know your way around an engine, and I need this place running at full efficiency." Marcus smirked. "Trust me, I wasn't under any illusions that you liked me." She shot him a sidelong glance, but continued. "Your job is to lead the maintenance team, make sure these machines don't break down, and fix them when they do. But you're on probation. You mess up, you're out." "Understood." Marcus nodded. Crystal clear. They stepped into the main garage, where a group of men stood huddled near a row of workstations, talking in low voices. As soon as Victoria entered, they straightened, their conversations halting. Marcus felt their eyes land on him, scanning, measuring. "Everyone," Victoria announced. "This is Marcus Johnson. He'll be overseeing maintenance." A beat of silence stretched through the room before one of the men, tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes, stepped forward. "Overseeing maintenance, huh?" the man said, crossing his arms. "That's funny. I thought we already had people for that." Victoria's tone didn't change. "And now you have someone better." A murmur rippled through the group, quiet but unmistakable. The bearded man's smirk widened. "Better, huh?" He tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly. "No offense, boss, but you sure about that?" I mean, his gaze slid to Marcus, slow and deliberate. Seems like he's still getting his bearings. Marcus knew exactly what that meant. The slight, the underlying meaning behind those words. He'd heard it before in different forms, from different men who all looked at him the same way. Victoria's expression was unreadable, but there was an edge to her voice when she responded. If you have an issue, Greg, you can take it up with me. Otherwise, get back to work. Greg held her gaze for a beat too long before giving an exaggerated shrug. Just making conversation, he said lightly, but there was a weight behind it, something unspoken. Then, with a smirk that made Marcus's hands itch, he turned and walked away. Victoria exhaled sharply, as if holding back something sharp-tongued, then turned to Marcus. "Welcome to the job," she muttered before striding off. Marcus stood there for a moment, letting the tension settle. Then he rolled his shoulders, turned toward the workstations, and got to work. The first week passed in the grind of long hours and silent tests. Marcus kept his head down, focused on the machines, the work, the familiar rhythm of metal and oil. He didn't need to win anyone over. He just needed to do his job, to prove, not to them, but to himself, that he belonged here. But the hostility in the garage hung thick in the air, unspoken but undeniable. The other mechanics would exchange glances when he walked in. Conversations were quiet whenever he approached, and Greg, always watching, always smirking, always found little ways to remind Marcus that this wasn't his space. It was in the small things, the missing tools when he reached for them, the forgotten instructions that left him fixing mistakes that weren't his. It was in the way Greg would laugh just a little too loud, making some joke just low enough for Marcus to know it was about him, but not loud enough to call him on it. Still, Marcus swallowed it down, grinding through each day. He had Lily to think about. He had no room for pride. He took every setback in stride, knowing that proving himself meant more than fighting battles that weren't worth it. Then the machine broke. It was a press, one of the biggest in the facility. A multi-million-dollar piece of equipment that shaped the aluminum body frames before they moved down the line. When it stopped working, everything stopped. A halt like that cost the company thousands of dollars every hour. Marcus was working on a conveyor belt in the back when he heard the commotion. Victoria was already there when he arrived, standing with arms crossed, her expression unreadable as a handful of engineers and managers stood around the silent machine. Greg was there too, leaning against a toolbox, watching. "Let me guess," Greg drawled, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Must have been some bad luck, bringing in new management." Marcus ignored him, stepping forward. "What's the issue?" One of the engineers, a wiry man in a crisp uniform, shot him a look of skepticism but answered anyway. "The press started making an off-rhythm grinding noise this morning. Then it just stopped altogether. We already tried a soft reset, checked the pneumatic systems, nothing." Marcus nodded, already running through possible causes in his head. The press was massive, but the problem had to be internal. Something disrupting the normal cycle. "Who was working on it last?" he asked. Greg gave an exaggerated shrug. "Couldn't tell you. We all do our part." Marcus ignored the jab, moving toward the control panel. The screen blinked with error codes, but he barely glanced at them. Error codes only told part of the story. What mattered was the sound, the feeling of the machine itself. He stepped up to the main body of the press, running a hand along its frame, feeling the vibration low, uneven like a beast still breathing, but barely. He knew this kind of machine. He'd worked on older models before. He glanced at the floor, beneath it. Oil, just a faint trace, but enough to confirm his suspicion. "Hydraulic issue," he muttered. He turned to Victoria. "You got schematics?" She nodded toward one of the engineers, who handed him a tablet. Marcus studied it for only a few seconds before setting it down and rolling up his sleeves. "I need access to the lower panel. Can someone pull it?" The engineers hesitated, exchanging glances. One of them, a younger guy, moved as if to help, but Greg let out a low chuckle. "Man, you serious?" Greg shook his head. "You think you're going to fix this thing like it's some old junker in a backyard shop? You don't just look at it and figure it out." Marcus clenched his jaw. He could feel all the eyes on him, waiting. For what? For him to snap, to back down. He turned, locking eyes with Greg. Yeah, he said simply. That's exactly what I do. And then, without another word, he dropped to one knee, reached under the machine, and got to work. It wasn't easy. The space was cramped. The bolts rusted from years of exposure, and the hydraulic system was nestled deep in the frame. But Marcus had done harder things, in worse conditions, with worse odds stacked against him. He worked by feel, by instinct, letting his hands tell him what the machine couldn't. It took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of sweat, of ignored comment from the men watching, of biting his tongue every time he heard Greg scoff. But when he tightened the last bolt, when he stood up and wiped the grease from his hands, he knew. Try it now, he called. One of the engineers hesitated before moving to control panel, fingers hovering over the restart sequence. Then, with a deep breath, he pressed a button. A low hum. A pause. Then the press came to life, metal groaning as a massive machine roared back into motion, the rhythm smooth, uninterrupted. The silence that followed wasn't the silence of failure. It was a silence of disbelief. Marcus exhaled, rolling his shoulders back. Looks like it's not junk after all, he muttered. Victoria was the first to speak. You just saved us thousands in downtime, she said, her voice even, controlled. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something she hadn't expected to find. Greg's jaw was tight, his smirk gone. Guess we got lucky, he muttered. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag, meeting his gaze head on. Guess so. And just like that, the balance shifted. The shift in the garage was subtle at first, but Marcus felt it. It was in the way the conversations didn't die as quickly when he walked in the way some of the younger mechanics started asking him questions instead of ignoring him. Respect wasn't given in places like this. It was earned, and whether they liked it or not, he had earned it. But not everyone was ready to accept that. Greg had been quieter since the press incident. But that didn't mean he was done. If anything, his silence felt more dangerous, like a storm waiting for the right moment to break. Marcus wasn't naive. He knew men like Greg, men who had spent their whole lives secure in the idea that their place in the world was unshakable, that people like Marcus belonged beneath them, invisible until needed. And when that balance got disrupted, they didn't let it slide. The hit came at the worst possible time. It was a Friday afternoon near the end of the shift. The facility had been running smooth all week. No major breakdowns, no setbacks. Marcus was starting to think, just maybe this could work. He could make this stick. And then, right when he was finishing up an inspection, Victoria's voice cut through the noise of the garage. Marcus, she called from across the floor. A word. He wiped the grease from his hands as he approached, already feeling the eyes on him. Conversations quieted. Victoria didn't call people out unless it was serious. She folded her arms, her face unreadable. I just got an incident report. Marcus frowned. What incident? Victoria held up a clipboard. A faulty recalibration on line 2. One of the hydraulic arms nearly crushed the casing. You signed off on the maintenance check. Marcus stiffened. That's impossible. Victoria didn't blink. It happened. His pulse pounded against his skull. He had checked line 2 himself, double-checked it. I didn't miss that, he said, his voice firm. Then how did it happen? Victoria's tone was neutral, but he knew she was testing him, waiting to see if he'd crack. Marcus turned, scanning the room. The others were watching, but one person wasn't just watching. He was smirking. Greg leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, looking entirely too pleased with himself. Marcus knew in an instant it had been him. A sabotage, small enough to avoid immediate catastrophe, but big enough to get Marcus blamed. His fingers curled into fists, a fire burning in his chest. But he forced himself to stay calm. If he lost his temper now, it was over. That's what Greg wanted. He exhaled through his nose, meeting Victoria's gaze. Give me 20 minutes, he said. I'll find the problem. Her eyes flicked toward Greg, then back to him. She hesitated, then handed him the clipboard. 20 minutes, she agreed. Marcus turned and strode toward line 2, barely hearing the murmurs that followed. He could feel Greg's eyes on him, feel the unspoken challenge in the air. But Marcus didn't engage. He had a job to do. He went over every bolt, every calibration point. It took 15 minutes to find the slightest misalignment in the pressure sensors. Not something that would be caught on a quick scan, but enough to cause a malfunction. The kind of mistake a real mechanic wouldn't make. The kind of mistake someone had to create. He straightened, wiping the sweat from his brow. He could march over to Greg, throw the evidence in his face, demand Victoria take action. But men like Greg were careful. He'd deny it, act offended, make it a he said situation. And if Marcus lost his cool, that would be all the excuse they needed to write him off. No, if Greg wanted to play a game, Marcus would play smarter. He grabbed a wrench and adjusted the calibration, fixing the issue in under a minute. Then he turned, walking back to Victoria, holding the clipboard out to her. "Fixed," he said. She scanned his face, and Marcus glanced at Greg, then back at her. He saw the unspoken question in her eyes. Did he know what had really happened? Of course he did. But instead, he just said, "Must have been a mistake." Victoria's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary. Then, slowly, she nodded. She turned to the room, raising her voice just enough. "Line 2 is cleared. Back to work." The tension broke. The men shuffled back to their stations, and Greg, he didn't look quite so smug anymore. Marcus met his eyes, just for a second, and gave him the smallest nod. Message received. Greg didn't own this place. And if he wanted Marcus gone, he was going to have to try a hell of a lot harder. The 30-day probation ended with little ceremony. There was no grand announcement, no formal meeting. Just an email from HR confirming his full-time position, a company badge with his name on it, and a set of keys to the maintenance office. The job was his. Marcus stared at the badge for a long moment, fingers tracing the embossed letters. It should have felt like a victory, but he knew better. This wasn't the finish line. It was just another starting point. Greg had been quieter since the Line 2 incident, but Marcus wasn't naive. The man wasn't the type to let things go. Still, he wasn't his concern anymore. His concern was Lily, and for the first time in too long, he could finally give her some stability. That afternoon, he picked her up from the company daycare, where she greeted him with an excited grin, showing off a crayon drawing of their new life. Him and a big house with flowers out front. "Do you like it?" she asked, eyes bright. Marcus swallowed past a lump in his throat. "Yeah, baby girl, I love it." As they walked toward the parking lot, Victoria was waiting by his car. She was dressed down for once, a simple blouse and slacks instead of her usual corporate armor. She held a coffee in one hand, her expression unreadable as always. "Johnson," she greeted. "Boss," he returned. She smirked. "You can call me Victoria now." "You made it." He raised an eyebrow. "So that's it? I'm in." She sipped her coffee. "You were in the second you fixed that press. This was just to see if you'd quit before we got here." Marcus huffed a laugh, shaking his head. "Figures." She hesitated then, glancing at Lily before looking back at him. "Listen, I don't do this often, but I wanted to say something. You were right back when we first talked. People like me don't usually notice people like you. And when we do, it's not always for the right reasons." Marcus didn't respond. He just let her talk. "I didn't help you because I felt bad. I helped because I saw someone who deserved the chance. But that doesn't change the fact that I get to make decisions like that, and you don't." She exhaled, as if frustrated with something she couldn't quite name. "I don't know if that's fair." Marcus tilted his head. "It's not." Victoria nodded, as if she expected that answer. "Well, maybe that's something I can work on." He studied her for a moment before finally asking, "Why me?" She took another sip of coffee, considering, "Because you remind me of someone. My dad. He worked in a shop just like this, fought to keep us above water when no one else would give him a shot. He died before I ever made it out of that life. But I think if someone had just given him the right opportunity, things might have been different." She glanced at him. "So maybe I was trying to fix something I couldn't back then." Marcus let out a low breath. He hadn't expected that. Lily tugged at his hand, oblivious of the weight of the conversation. "Daddy, can we get ice cream?" Marcus chuckled, ruffling her curls. "Yeah, baby girl, we can do that." He looked back at Victoria, who gave him the faintest nod before stepping away. See you Monday, Johnson. See you Monday. As he lifted Lily into the truck, he glanced down at the badge still in his hand, the weight of it settling in. This wasn't luck. It wasn't charity. It was earned. And for the first time in a long, long time, the road ahead didn't feel impossible. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.